I wanted to have a little fun today and go back to the time when I was just getting to know John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And I'm sure my experience wasn't that much different from anyone else's because, I bought into those stereotypes and the labels, back then, like the quiet one and the cute one, etc. And even Ringo said that he appealed most to like the mothers and the grannies and the kiddies back then. And I was a kiddie, in the 60s. And so, yeah, Ringo was my favorite back then. Even going into the mid 70s, Ringo was my favorite because I thought he was cute. I thought he was funny. I enjoyed watching him play the drums. Whenever these guys came on TV, I couldn't take my eyes off of him. And not much has changed since then. I really loved the Beatles in the 60s and their music, but, they all seemed just like this big old blob to me. I couldn't tell one from the other, like except for Ringo, and I didn't really care. And I didn't care. I just was listening to the music. It wasn't until I became a teenager in the 70s that I wanted to know a little bit more about these guys. I became boy crazy, and so I became crazy and obsessed about these boys. And my way of getting to know more about these guys was like listening to the music and finding out all I could about them. And so I was writing down all the lyrics to like every song. I wanted to find out like who wrote what song, who sang what song. I wanted to be able to tell just by listening. Like, okay, this is John and this is George and this is Paul. But I already knew who Ringo was because, like I said, Ringo was my favorite. And there was just something special like about a Ringo song. It had a warmth to it because Ringo was singing it with that average, ordinary, like everyman voice. It made Ringo seem accessible to me, like Ringo could be my friend. And I kind of thought of Ringo as like the best friend of my older brother. Like he was the guy who would, like I'd see around the house, around the neighborhood all the time and like wave to him, etc. It was all very cool, etc. Or I'd be hanging out with my girlfriends, kind of chatting it up and everything. And then Ringo and my older brother and everybody else would be playing ball over there. And like we'd wave at them and everything was all very cool, all very wholesome. Or sometimes Ringo would come over and kind of chat up me and my girlfriends and he'd make us laugh. It was all very lovely, all very wonderful. And sometimes, Ringo would give me like a special smile, like just for me, like the little sister, like of his best friend. It was all very charming. Ringo was charming. And Ringo was also that guy that came over to help fix my bike. It was like, yeah, they were playing ball over there and Ringo walked away from the ball game. Everybody's yelling at him and say, Ringo, we're going to lose the game without you. Ringo said, I don't care. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to help Jackie out with the bike. Ringo was always putting me first, always making me feel special. Like, Ringo and his songs, they were just like a great big warm, friendly hug, even back then. And then there was George. George was a bit of an enigma to me, early on. I could never really tell, is this George singing? It took me forever to kind of figure out like, is this George singing? Yeah, it says George is singing Do You Want to Know a Secret? And it says, yeah, George is singing this other song over here. But I don't know. It was just, I could never put my finger on it there. I just never really caught into like, Do You Want to Know a Secret? Roll Over Bait Homewood was kind of cool. Yeah, but these songs didn't really help me to get to know George. Okay, I just didn't understand him. Yeah, he was kind of cute. I liked how he looked. I liked the fact that he was the guitar guy. All that was fantastic. And I had a little mini crush on him, but I didn't really know George. He wasn't as accessible to me as Ringo was. It wasn't until like later on when he began to kind of write and sing like his own songs that I got to know more about George and I would feel George a lot more. I go, oh, this is George. He's a really lovely, warm soul. Like Here Comes the Sun, For You Blue, Something, Gently Weeps. Those are all really lovely. But a bit of a turning point for me was Long, Long, Long. And I go, oh, this is something interesting. I'm really feeling something special here with George. George was that guy, this boy, like my age, over there hanging out with all the other guys. He's not the loudest, he's not like a braggart or anything like that. He's also not the wallflower. He's just right there in the middle of the pack, looking pretty cool, had a great laugh, had a great look, sitting there with his guitar. And I'm just hanging here with my girlfriends. We're just kind of chatting, gossiping, probably talking about boys. And I'm just watching these guys, and I look away and I'm talking to my girlfriends, and I look over here and George is smiling at me. He's giving me kind of like a lopsided smile or a look or whatever. And I kind of go, oh, this is George. Okay, George is showing me something here. And I look away and then I look back and George isn't looking at me anymore, but I'm thinking of George in a different way. And then a couple days later, my girlfriend tells me, it's like, Jackie, George likes you. And I'm going, oh my God. Like, so something just begins to bloom there for me with the song Long, Long, because George shows me like some more depth here, a lot more emotion. There's just something, again, couldn't quite put my finger on it with George, but I dug it. I liked it. So yeah, I began to crush even more about George. George was always like this really cool guy, but a bit of an enigma to me. But then there was Paul. Now, Paul McCartney, I knew that he was kind of a heavy. I knew he was one of the front men there because the camera was always on him. He was so very cute, and he was very different because he was always moving around and always happy and everything. It seemed like he was flirting with everybody in the audience and everything. He just made you feel good just looking at Paul. Plus, like I said, he was different. He had that weird bass and he was left-handed, and I loved all of his different voices. I loved his music. I loved his songs. He wasn't too hard to figure out which songs that he was singing. So I kind of sort of got to know Paul, but I didn't really. Okay, I didn't really, because his songs were just like upbeat and happy like that. Paul was that guy who you would crush on. Like, everybody loved Paul. He was so cute, and like he would always be flirting with you and everything like that. He'd just give you a thrill, etc. And then maybe like you'd go out on a few dates with that guy. Okay, and maybe you thought that he was your boyfriend. And he'd say, like, you're my girlfriend, Jackie. But then you'd find out, like, later on, oh, he's dating your best friend over there. It's like, well, what's going on with that? And you'd question him. He'd say, no. And you'd believe him. You'd believe Paul because whatever, man, because it's Paul. And then he was the guy who'd say, like, I'm coming over. And he'd like come over really late. And then maybe he'd bring you a bag of chips and everything would be okay. Or maybe he said he's going to call you, and he never calls, but he calls later. And like I said, everything is okay. Like you're there for him. So again, you really love Paul. You're crushing on him. You like pretty much everything that he does, but somehow you feel like he's not really being real with you. He's not always like telling you the truth. But like I said, like you're there for it. He's just that guy. And then there's John Lennon. Even as a teenager, I could tell that there was more depth to John and his songs and his artistry. I really loved his voice. I loved his vibe. I loved what he was singing about. I was this, sensitive, emotional, arty teenager, and John is singing like Help, Norwegian Wood, I'm a Loser, Nowhere Man, all those songs. And I could relate to that, I could vibe to that. And also John could make me laugh. Like with I'm Only Sleeping, I'm So Tired. I played those songs over and over again. I really loved it. And then Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey. Are you kidding me? Like with that song, and even Revolution Number 9, I didn't necessarily think it was funny, but I thought it was different. And that's the other thing I liked about John that I could, he's different. There's something weird and different about John. And again, I'm a weird teenager. I dug all that stuff. Plus, I really loved his voice. But John was that guy. He was like an older guy. And he had a girlfriend. So I put him in a box. It's like, okay, I really like what he's telling me here. And I can tell John is telling me the truth. Unlike Paul, I didn't really think Paul was telling me the truth. John, I felt, was telling me the truth, but he had a girlfriend. He was an older guy, whatever. And me and my girlfriends were watching John over there with all the older boys. And John was like the loudmouth. He was like the loudest, and he was breaking stuff. And we're kind of going, oh my God, that John guy. Who is that guy? I don't really, just stay over there, John. Like, keep your distance. Like, your songs are fine, but whatever, dude. But then I saw John with his girlfriend, really sweet, cute girlfriend. And he was very lovely with the girl. And I'm going like, who is this guy? So John could never put your finger on John, couldn't figure him out. So I just had to say like, whatever, man. And truly, that's what I still do to this day. It's like, whatever, man, to all these guys. I'm not going to ever figure out or get to know these guys. This was just my little teenage, girl imagination, trying to figure these guys out, what I pictured, what I imagined based on, like the songs they were singing and how they made me feel, and I'm not, that teenage girl anymore, and I don't think of these guys that same way. But I guess we all had our own way, of being Beatles fans back then. Yeah, but that was my way. A little embarrassing, but that's just how it was. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I really and truly appreciate it. And until next time, peace and love one another. Take care. And I kind of wonder, I wonder if you guys were kind of feeling the same thing, or maybe you were like one of those guys like I was describing back in the day. Because you got to know, like those are guys out there. Those guys exist out there.